What do you think is the motivation for his invasion of Ukraine in 22?
It's what he's said for years, which is basically the reconstitution of the Soviet Union.
Do you think there's empire-building components to that motivation?
I would trust most my friends in Eastern and Central Europe who certainly do think that. There's a reason why the Baltic countries are the countries that are spending highest in percentage of GDP on defense, and it's because they're very worried. I don't think they're faking it. I don't think they're faking it for me or for anyone else. I think the Lithuanians, the Latvians, the Estonians, and others are genuinely worried for the first time in some decades.
Do you think there's a possibility that the war continues indefinitely? Even if there's a ceasefire and the peace reached, the war will resume.
Yes.
And he will seek expansion even beyond Ukraine?
Yes. And the most obvious thing is that if Trump manages to negotiate a ceasefire, it'll be a temporary pause. And whoever comes in as president after Trump, Putin will use the opportunity to advance again. Yes. Again, one of the things that I have heard from parts of the American right and others is that all he wants is Ukraine. That's all he wants. And that he has no history or of rhetoric or actions that suggest anything else. And again, it's one of the reasons why it's useful traveling to places and seeing things with your own eyes, because I very much remember being in the country of Georgia after Putin tried to invade in 2008. So I just, again, people don't have to be the greatest supporters of the Ukrainian cause just to recognize that it doesn't seem to be the case that Ukraine is the only thing in Putin's vision.
Do you see value and maybe depth and power to the realist perspective of all this? Somebody like John Mearsheimer's formulation of all this, that in these invasions of Georgia, of Ukraine, it's using military power to expand the sphere of influence in the region in a cold calculation of geopolitics.
It's interesting. One of the fascinating things about the last few years is that there's been an act of sort of necromancy of certain figures who were totally debunked in the area of Ukraine, Mearsheimer, and in the case of Israel, people like Finkelstein. And it's been interesting because these are people that one hadn't heard of for some years because they were not listened to usually for good reason. But by the way, first of all, I'm very skeptical of the term realist in foreign policy because most people, to some extent, will say that they are a realist in foreign policy. Very few people are surrealists in foreign policy. Very few people are unrealists.
I would like to meet them.
A surrealist foreign policy analyst.
We did mention Alice in Wonderland. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should introduce the term. But I mean, if you want to look gimlet-eyed out across the world, you're a realist. I think the steelman of their argument would be Russia has or believes it has a sphere of influence, and it is regrettable, but there's very little we can do about that. That would be about the best version of that argument that you can make.
Well, to expand on that, steelman, isn't this how superpowers operate in the dark, realist/surrealist way? Meaning the United States uses military power to have a sphere influence over the whole globe, really. China appears to be willing to use military power to expand its sphere of influence.
And political power, yeah, more importantly in the case of China.
Political power.
Non-kinetic warfare to take over areas, Hong Kong being the obvious one.
But behind that, isn't there always a kinetic threat?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, you disappear some booksellers and students who are protesting, of course. But to go back to this, yeah, of course. Okay, countries believe they have or would like to have spheres of influence. I do think at some point that the so-called realists on that have to try to decide how much leeway that allows you to give to a fairly rapacious regime. And it's not. I mean, it's not the easiest calculation always to make. You have to work out whether or not, for instance, it is true that if Putin had managed to go all the way to Kiev in the first weeks of the war in 22, he would have gone straight on to other places. And, maybe he would have done, maybe he would have taken his time, maybe he wouldn't have done. And this is a very fine calculation that changes every week, let alone every year. My friends in Georgia, I thought, were wildly off the mark when they were believing that after 2008 they could get, for instance, either NATO membership or EU membership. And I thought that was completely unlikely, and I still think it's unlikely and almost certainly undesirable for Europe and for NATO, because you've got to be very careful and obviously this is one of the issues with Ukraine and has been since the 90s is, are you going to set up a tripwire to start World War III? And that's not a small thing to consider.